questions do you have about gluconeogenesis so far? Everything good? Okay. All right, here's a question for you then. This is a tough one. Okay. For any of the medical biochemistry stuff, questions, if you don't know the answer, the liver is always a good guess, because the liver can do everything. In this case, the liver-specific isoform is the correct answer. So, just to remind us where we're going, we're talking about futile cycling and how we can shut off glycolysis when gluconeogenesis is turned on, and vice versa. Okay, so we can do that at three different key steps, and the pyruvate kinase step is one of them. So the conversion of phospholynyl pyruvate to pyruvate in glycolysis, that's a single-step reaction, one step that's catalyzed by pyruvate kinase. The liver-specific isoform of pyruvate kinase is phosphorylated by protein kinase A, and that then will shut the enzyme off. Okay? So if we're making phospholynyl pyruvate then through gluconeogenesis, because protein kinase A is going to be activated when gluconeogenesis is happening, this is going to prevent the phospholynyl pyruvate from being converted back into pyruvate. Is that clear? Then we also get the transcriptional regulation of the phospholynyl pyruvate carboxy kinase, as we showed before, the inhibition by insulin and activation by glucagon and protein kinase A, that's going to be turning this pathway on when this pathway is off. Okay, so are we all clear on that? Okay, so let's go north then. Let's take our phospholynyl pyruvate and we'll go north to glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate and dihydroxyacetone phosphate. Those come together to make fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. Now, the enzymes that do all these steps, these are the same glycolytic enzymes. Okay, aldolase is cutting fructose 1,6-bisphosphate into the triose phosphate in glycolysis. The same enzyme is functioning in the reverse to do the reverse reaction in gluconeogenesis. Okay. So we'll just skip over that then and consider the metabolic fate for fructose 1,6-bisphosphate. And we'll have a little discussion of glycolysis first. Okay, getting a lot fewer people are answering questions in the second hour than in the first hour, but that's fine. Okay, so remember PFK2, that makes fructose 2,6-bisphosphate, and that acts as an allosteric activator of PFK1. Okay, so when PFK2 is active, then when the kinase domain of PFK2 is active, then PFK1 is more active, and glycolysis happens at a faster rate. So very elegantly, PFK1's corresponding gluconeogenic enzyme, fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase, that is inhibited by the same messenger, fructose 2,6-bisphosphate. So fructose 2,6-bisphosphate made by PFK2 in conditions of carbohydrate excess. This is acting as an allosteric activator of PFK1 and an inhibitor of fructose 1,6-bisphosphatase. So that then is a very elegant way that we can avoid futile cycling and just spinning around in circles like this. And we wouldn't want to spin around in circles like that because phosphofructokinase 1, that's using ATP as its substrate, right? So it's hydrolyzing a high-energy phosphate bond to put a phosphate on the product here. Fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, this is a phosphatase, not a kinase. Okay, so when it's taking a phosphate off of the fructose 1,6-bisphosphate, that's making inorganic phosphate, not a high-energy bond. Okay, so if we just went around in this circle, we would be consuming ATP and we would be going nowhere. Okay, so the fructose 6-phosphate then, that can be isomerized to the glucose 6-phosphate through the same glycolytic enzyme. And the next key point at which we can eliminate the futile cycling is with the transcriptional regulation of glucose 6-phosphatase. Remember, this gene is transcriptionally regulated by cortisol and glucagon, similarly to the PEP-CK. We also have the glucokinase enzyme. Remember, the gluconeogenesis is happening in the liver, where we're expressing the version of hexokinase that has the very high Km, and we call that enzyme glucokinase. So because this is less active, or it requires a higher glucose concentration to be active than hexokinase out in peripheral tissues, this glucose then is more likely to go out through the GLUT2 transporter and be taken up by another cell than it is to go back down this pathway. Okay, so there's three examples of how we're shutting off glycolysis when gluconeogenesis is on, and vice versa when gluconeogenesis is off. Are those clear and kind of gelling with stuff that we've already touched on? Okay. All right. So let's look a little bit more at that glucose 6-phosphatase enzyme. The glucose 6-phosphatase, this is the enzyme that's defective in von Gurke's disease, if you recall that. And there's actually two different flavors of von Gurke's. So the glucose 6-phosphatase, this is an enzyme that is in the endoplasmic reticulum lumen. So you can get a functional glucose 6-phosphatase deficiency both with this transporter that puts glucose 6-phosphatase into the lumen of the endoplasmic reticulum, or with the deficiency of the actual phosphatase enzyme itself. Okay, so it's just showing that most of gluconeogenesis is a cytoplasmic process, but this final step is catalyzed in the endoplasmic reticulum. Okay. And then I think I have my slides a little out of order here for some reason, but I think I talked about this in the last slide, and we've looked at the differences of the hexokinase versus glucokinase kinetics way back 4 months ago or so. Okay, so with this futile cycling, the idea is that when gluconeogenesis is on, glycolysis is off, and vice versa. And the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, is that gluconeogenesis is energetically expensive. If we look at the conversion of 2 moles of pyruvate to 1 mole of glucose, we've got 2 ATPs from the pyruvate carboxylase reaction. 2 GTPs are being consumed in the phospholynyl pyruvate carboxykinase reaction, and then not shown here, but or not discussed, but the phosphoglycerate kinase enzyme, that's a glycolytic enzyme that's functioning in reverse, but that's making the equivalent of two high energy phosphate bonds and converting it into inorganic phosphate. Okay, so the energetics here, oh, and then sorry, one more, we get the glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate dehydrogenase. That's another glycolytic enzyme that's reversible. In this case, in gluconeogenesis, it's going to be oxidizing an NADH to NAD+, and we can get 2.5 ATP per NADH. So if you total that up, you get 11 high-energy phosphate bonds are consumed in converting 1 mole of pyruvate, or excuse me, 2 molecules of pyruvate into 1 molecule of glucose. Now, how much ATP can you get going from glucose to pyruvate? It depends what you do with the pyruvate afterwards, right? But, well, let's say if we go from glucose to lactate, we know that can only get 2 ATPs, right? Remember that? Okay. So essentially we're using a lot more energy to make glucose from pyruvate than we could ever get back from it. Is that clear? Okay, so why do we do that? Why don't we just die from lack of entropy then? Well, it's a head scratcher, and essentially the liver, the liver is burning other substrates like fat and amino acids, fat principally, and that's where that ATP is coming from, is by fat oxidation. Okay, so the liver is burning other substrates to get the energy to reverse photosynthesis, if you will, to make new carbohydrate so that we can sustain red blood cells. Okay. All right, let's look at a couple, one circumstance of gluconeogenesis. Now, gluconeogenesis is a fasted and starved state process, typically, right? For most, 99% of the cases, gluconeogenesis will be a fed state process. There's a circumstance where it's not. There might be more, but I can't think of them. Okay, so most of the meals that we have carbohydrates as a large source of their calories. So fat is generally the most calories that we eat, then carbohydrates, and then protein. So generally when we talk about eating a meal, we're talking about eating carbohydrates, and that carbohydrate then is going to result in an increase in blood glucose, and then we get an insulin response. That the insulin response then causes a decrease in glucagon, and then it also causes a increased uptake of glucose in tissues throughout the body and activation of glycolysis and the different storage pathways, right? Now, in the special case of a meal that was without protein, or excuse me, without carbohydrate, say a only protein meal, there you don't have any carbohydrates in the diet that can contribute to an increase in blood glucose concentration, right? But if you're still doing metabolism, your cells are still going to be needing glucose, right? So your glucose is going to fall if you don't have some process to sustain it. And how do you sustain it? You sustain it through what we just talked about, gluconeogenesis. Right, but in the case of a high protein meal, the substrates for gluconeogenesis aren't going to be coming from protein breakdown. They're going to be coming from the amino acids in the protein of your last meal. Does that make sense? So if you just think about like what the body wants in this situation, in the case of a very high protein meal, the body wants aspects of fed metabolism and aspects of fasted metabolism. We want aspects of fed metabolism because we want to be turning those amino acids from our diet into new mass, into new protein. Right? That's one metabolic fate of those amino acids from the protein meal. Another metabolic fate is to be gluconeogenic substrates and to help to sustain the blood glucose. Okay, so the endocrine response to a protein-only meal is going to be both an increase in insulin and an increase in glucagon because we need both those kind of fasted and fed state processes happening at the same time. Does that make sense? I mean, it's not a situation you're going to encounter because most people, are addicted to carbs just like we all are, right? But I think it's helpful to think about because it kind of, think about what the body wants. The body needs glucose. We can't ever go below this. So how do we get it in the case of a no carbohydrate meal? Okay. Let's go on and consider some disorders of gluconeogenesis, and then we'll discuss some clinical cases. I know we talked about lactic acidosis and glycolysis, right? But we didn't really touch on it too much in the glycogen storage diseases. And you have to think like, which of these glycogen storage diseases is glucose 6-phosphate going to be trapped within the cell, within the liver cell? Okay, very good. So glucose 6-phosphatase deficiency. The deficiency in glucose 6-phosphatase, we call this glycogen storage disease 1 or von Gerke's disease. That was the little boy who was the zebra from the lecture last Friday. Okay. So glucose 6-phosphatase deficiency or von Gerke's, that can manifest or that can cause the lactic acidosis as a symptom because we get glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis is occurring in the liver because we're in the fasted state metabolism. The liver is trying to sustain blood glucose through these processes, but the glucose 6-phosphate here is trapped. And eventually it's going to be accumulating such that it's exceeding the high Km of glucokinase, and it's going to be a glycolysis substrate. It's going to be forced into glycolysis. And because you're starving or you're starved of carbohydrates, this is going to really be ramping up, and you're never going to get the normal blood glucose homeostasis to stop it. So this glucose 6-phosphate, then this can be fermented to lactate and then exported out of the cell. So you would still get the fasting hypoglycemia, but you could get the lactic acidosis as a compensation. You wouldn't get that, for example, in glycogen synthase deficiency because there you're never getting this excess free glucose in the liver cell. Okay. As I think I mentioned before, we can get the von Gerke's disease with either a mutation that knocks out that endoplasmic reticulum transporter or the actual phosphatase itself. And let's see, so the symptoms, fasting hypoglycemia, that's kind of characteristic of a lot of the glycogen storage diseases that affect the liver. Lactic acidosis because of the metabolic fate of this glucose 6-phosphate that's trapped is to be fermented to lactate. Hepatomegaly because you get everything backed up here and you get packing on the glycogen in the liver. Hyperuricemia, this is the nucleotide catabolism to make uric acid as a compensation for starvation. And then the hyperlipidemia, this is that, overactivation of hormone-sensitive lipase. That's the body is trying to switch to fat metabolism to compensate for the lack of blood glucose. Okay. So glucose 6-phosphatase deficiency, it's called a glycogen storage disease, but it's going to affect the ability of the liver to make glucose in both glycogen degradation and in gluconeogenesis. Okay, so moving up the pathway, fructose 1,6-bisphosphate deficiency. This is a disorder that, unlike the von Gierke's disease, which affects both glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis, the fructose 1,6-bisphosphate deficiency, this is only going to affect gluconeogenesis. So the hallmark symptoms here would be the fasting hypoglycemia, but it would take a longer fast to develop the hypoglycemia than with von Gierke's, because in the fructose 1,6-bisphosphate deficiency, the liver is still able to sustain blood glucose through glycogenolysis with no problem. So this one, may not ever manifest itself clinically until you get a much more prolonged fast. Okay, then the final, I think, one that we'll talk about is the PepCK deficiency, or phospholynyl pyruvate carboxykinase deficiency. And this one, until 5 years ago or so, this was controversial as to whether this existed or not. There were, isolated cases where they could presumably diagnose it by a lack of enzyme activity, but they could never find causative mutations that were associated with the PepCK deficiency. Until, let's see, they were published in 2017, and there was a family pedigree where they documented pathogenic mutations that were inherited that resulted in the PepCK deficiency. And the outcomes for these patients were not good, I guess, compared to like the von Gierke's. So the fatty liver and failure to thrive, and frequently death in infancy were reported with these cases. And why one is more severe than the other, I don't really know. It may have something to do with the fact that von Gierke's is well recognized and been around for a while and people are looking at it, whereas this one is just brand new and nobody knows about it. Okay. Are there, what questions do you have? Okay, I have a question for you then, and it's related to the PepCK deficiency. Is this a challenging one? Okay, talk with your neighbor for just a moment, and then I'm going to ask the same question in a slightly different way, and that might be a little more revealing. Okay, do we have some ideas on this one? Let's take a look at. Okay, so looks like not quite a majority picked my favorite answer. Let's look at the same question but in a little bit different way and see if this helps. You want to talk with your neighbor about that?
Then alanine can pass these.
Okay, should we take a look at this one? Okay, so everybody or almost everybody picked glycerol. Acetyl-CoA or acetoacetate. The carbon for those two can never end up in glucose as gluconeogenesis. Unless it went, in several different quadrants of that map to get there. Okay, so let's look at, I'm going to just go back. Where is a good spot to look at this? Okay, it's not really shown here, but the glycerol is entering at the triose phosphate level. Okay, and I can keep going way back here, I think, and find it. Oh boy, this is way back here. Okay, there we go. I think that's it. Yeah, so glycerol is entering at the triose phosphate level. Okay, so that's going to ultimately be the, a substrate for the aldolase reaction. So when you use glycerol as a substrate for gluconeogenesis, you're bypassing that PepCK state, or that whole dip into the TCA cycle. Does that make sense? Okay, good. For the cases that I'd like to discuss, I've got a couple of cases, and I added them to the Canvas download site as a time-released asset, so I think that they should be viewable now. Do you see a document in Canvas? And it's just the same stuff I've got on the screen, it's just you can read it on your tablet or what have you rather than reading it on the screen. Okay, so this is a couple of cases of disordered gluconeogenesis. And this is, again, a sad one, so be prepared. Okay, any impressions on this first page? Diabetes. Yeah, I mean, he's got very high blood glucose. Well, not, in the diabetes sense, not super sky high, but definitely abnormal. And then increased thirst and increased urination. Those are kind of classic symptoms of diabetes, as you're trying to dilute out that excess, dilute out the excess glucose and then pee it out, essentially. Okay, so let's take a look. He was sent home, and he got worse. And the father is being involved in the medical care, and he brings in all the prescriptions. Anything you notice? Yeah. He was prescribed primidone, but the father brought back prednisone. So what do you think's going on?
Someone swapped their medication.
Yeah, so how would that explain his condition?
Prednisone, steroid, that can increase glucose levels or blood glucose levels.
Yep, through activating PepCK transcription and the other gluconeogenic genes, right? Does that sound understandable? Now, Should he just stop the prednisone immediately, cold turkey? Yeah, that's something you can, people who are on steroids and glucocorticoids, they generally have a taper off period, so they kind of go off slowly so that they don't have a massive hypoglycemia problem, to give their time to adjust. So that's what happened with our kid, but he did not survive the night, so he was dead the next morning. Okay, so they found out there was essentially a pharmacy error slash physician error, where both of them ended up being prescribed, and only the prednisone ever actually made it to the family and was given. And if you look at the dosage, the 450 milligram tablets, that's a pretty huge dose. Okay, so essentially this kid was killed by his physicians and his medical care team. Okay, so he was, cause of death was diabetic ketoacidosis. And, you know, the huge amounts of acetone as the degradation product of acetoacetate, glucose in the blood and the eye was super high. Okay, so definitely you want to consider hyperglycemia as a potential consequence anytime you use a glucocorticoid or a corticosteroid. Generally, these drugs aren't used to manipulate people's blood glucose levels. They're used for, you know, anti-inflammatory or other reasons, but they have this pretty potent effect. Okay. So why don't we talk with your neighbors about some of these questions? Because I think, you know, there's a good like biochemistry reason for this case, but it kind of strikes me that it's maybe not the most important part of it.
I just wrote down with Tommy 21.
Yeah, it's really complicated because I used to deal with that a lot when I was like a technician, or a medical assistant, where I like literally if one drug got, let's just say like signed right or whatever, it took like 45 minutes, like on you know, and then like I'm sure they don't pay the people who deal with the phones at the Walgreens very well, and it's just like yeah, exactly.
Okay, do we, is this time well spent? Okay, what about this first question? Who do you think was responsible in this situation? Well, okay, the patient?
No.
The dad?
No.
Okay, good. In the back, you had a thought?
I was gonna say the pharmacist and the physician.
It sounds like, yeah, somewhere they both kind of dropped the ball on that, right? Anyone agree?
Well, I just have a question for sending the patient home. Is that like a normal response, or should that have been a clear, like, we mixed up the medication, we need to like send you to the ER, to the hospital?
Any thoughts on that? I mean, given what happened, yeah, that seems like that's definitely was a mistake.
Especially considering he had a blood sugar of 100 plus.
Yep.
You normally don't send kids home with that unless if they're being treated for diabetes.
I think like in the diabetes, if somebody is diabetic, I don't think that would be such an unusual blood glucose level. I mean, it wouldn't be good, but it's not like, way out of range. But
Also, it's concerning that one, that the physician ordered 50 milligrams of prednisone, and two, that the pharmacist thought it was okay to give a child that. I mean, most adults are on less than 5 milligrams of prednisone for like an autoimmune condition.
yeah, so it's probably like a horse pill that he's taking there. Yep. Yep. What about? Oh, yes.
So if someone has like diabetes, like that blood glucose level isn't like crazy, but like did they not test for ketone bodies and like check for ketoacidosis? Because like that would have been like hospitalization.
They didn't do it. Yeah, there are like dipstick tests you can do in urine, and pretty simple tests, but it wasn't done. So, what about the pharmacy companies for making drugs with similar names like that? What about that third question? Did you get a chance to talk about that? Were you?
We didn't really get a chance to get
Okay.
we were on the first two, yeah.
Did
I
you?
would say, yeah, I've seen like some pretty serious bias against people with fetal alcohol syndrome. Just personally, like in the ambulance and the clinics, I think like sometimes they can present with like symptoms or conditions that might be like require more work as healthcare providers, and I think like sometimes that oftentimes like leads to them being treated less well. So who knows? Maybe they would have just seen some numbers or seen a prescription that you're like, wow, that doesn't seem right. But then you see maybe this person has a disability that looks a certain way or presents a certain way, and you might say, oh, well, that makes sense. And I could totally see it going in that direction.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. I mean, just it's a complicated kid. Like he's a troubled kid, right? He's got a seizure disorder, multiple medications, and so, the people in the clinic could say, "Oh, him again." Then with the fetal alcohol syndrome, that might be in his charts, or there are sometimes facial features that are kind of hallmarks of fetal alcohol syndrome. So maybe just somebody looking at him is gonna, just assume that he's got that.
Like here at Essentia, I know I had a patient who yeah, they'd go in the emergency room 2 or 3 times a week, and she was maybe 24, so probably the age of a lot of people in this room. Severe fetal alcohol syndrome, was constantly suicidal, would, if left unattended, would try to swallow needles from the sharps containers, stuff like that. But unfortunately led to a situation where whenever I would bring this patient in, all the nurses would very loudly and inappropriately say, oh, not this person again, right in front of the patient. And they one time made her, she had a bunch of seizures and was not very responsive for me. So we were gonna move her over like we do with the sheets. And the nurses said, oh, she's not gonna learn how to behave if you help her, make her do it herself. So they wouldn't actually let us assist her moving over, and eventually we did it because we said it was so bad, but they hate her, and this is here in Duluth.
Yeah, it's troubling to hear that, definitely. Okay, well, this question, I guess I'm going to leave to the future leaders in healthcare. Okay, any thoughts? Okay, so let's go back to biochemistry. Okay, yeah, so resulting from systemic shortcomings in his healthcare system. You know, we could just, how many times a day do you hear that? But, like, that's what it actually means, right? Okay, so people die.
It's like the red eyes.
Okay, so got a chance to. There you go. So you could make the same question about, you know, somebody with diabetes or kind of a hallmark symptom of hyperglycemia. Okay, this one's pretty easy, right? Okay, good. Yeah, so destruction of beta cells in the pancreas, that could definitely cause hyperglycemia. But since he's, you know, known to have the prednisone, it's probably the hepatic gluconeogenesis. Okay, one more. Oh, I forgot. So the gene name is PCK1. The enzyme name is PepCK, but it's, yeah. looking for PepCK there. Okay, good. So can, you know, as usual, I can write one stem and get a lot of mileage out of it for questions, right? Okay. All right, should we do a little bit of a somewhat happier case? Any impressions you'd like to share? Okay. So we have hypoglycemia and then signs of liver dysfunction, right, with the elevated AST and ALT. And we have a hypertriglyceridemia and lactic acidemia as well. Then there was a every 2 hours feeding with medium chain fatty acid triglycerides, and that started in between these 2 visits. And that seems to be helping both the liver function and improving lactic acidosis and, let's see, and normalizing the blood glucose. What was the rationale for that dietary change then? Yeah.
Bring in downstream
Well, they're going to be metabolized to acetyl-CoA, right? So the fatty acids, they'll be made to acetyl-CoA and then used as a fuel in the TCA cycle. So the basic idea is it'd be a ketogenic diet. So switching her away from carbohydrates and having the feeding be very frequent. So he doesn't ever get into the fasted state metabolism. That's a frequent approach for conditions like this, but I think really it could be any, you could have frequent carbohydrate meals and it would probably help as well. So this is a case of von Gerke, the glucose 6-phosphatase disease condition. And so there's a novel mutation that was found, or excuse me, not a novel mutation, a known mutation. And this MCT formula with the frequent feedings has essentially resolved the condition and allowed the child to develop normally. Okay, so yeah, why the glucose 6-phosphatase deficiency has a better outcome than the PEP-CK deficiency. I don't have a good answer for that, except maybe there's some residual activity of the glucose 6-phosphatase here. Okay, so this is a nice case, pretty easy intervention. It's cheap to make a dietary change generally. So, okay, are there questions about gluconeogenesis that I can help with? All right, well, I'll let you chew on that for a few days, and if you have questions about it, come see me up on the 3rd floor.
Downstairs.
Nobody's gonna take this, huh? Gonna take it. Hey, I'm stealing a lunch. Oh, okay, great.
Do you have good ones? Oh, yeah, or you can airdrop. I don't want to see that. April's iPad Air. Yeah, now. Pearl. Was that mine? And then I can even open it in GoodNotes. Import into current document, which is where I wanted it anyway. Thank you. Yeah, it's done really well. Okay. Well. Oh, look how good we are. Well, good idea with that one. Yes. So you did well. Downstairs. You're gonna come? Yes, I am. Sorry. 68. Oh, hey guys. How's it going? How are you? Doing good. Yeah. You're studying. I did the test. That's always good. So I did that and I was like, dude, I did. And I was like, so I want to know because I listen, if I don't feel ready, I'm gonna just I know it's gonna be good. I know two.
I did kind of pick up on
I
that.
really want to take my phone on Friday.
What?
Yeah, I haven't talked
I'm just gonna take a piece and see what's left. Where's it at?
Yeah, I know. I saw it and I was like, bro, I don't even know where to start.
I'm like,
So that was
I
literally
know,
a beer.
I know, it looks so much like a beer can and it's
Oh, it
water.
does.
It's water.
Sure it is.
It's
Just kidding.
water.
That's water.
It's called liquid death.
Also would be a great name for a beer though. I used to play one too back in.
I am not surprised. So anyways.
Alright.
And then they
I think
said,
that's why I'm a little bit like
maybe
at
just have
myself
you go
because
receive
like I
one.
know
Just
if
throw
I
the ball high up and then you just jump and
Wait,
get
did
it.
you just reach?
And that worked too.
Perfect. You've met Salil, right? You know
Of
Salil?
course.
Alright.
Yeah.
Good. Salil's doing
Okay,
his
so
lab.
let's see, you
bench talk
have.
today.
No, I want to copy my presentation here.
Wonderful.
Sometimes my laptop gets issues.
Wonderful, okay. Carol, we have a Zoom that I don't know about.
Oh. Amanda Klein and I are on it right now.
Yay.
Should I invite the room? Here, I thought of
Well, can you,
anything you need.
It's like usually people stay for this.
You want the meeting number, blah, blah, blah.
yeah, what are the odds
I'll
you
be
can
that
come up here and give me
Don't worry about it.
meeting ID and passcode?
The odds are ever in your favor.
Oh, I love that. Okay. Plug this mouse in later. Okay.
This folder right here. Amanda Klein, how was Toronto?
Good. How did you know I was in Toronto?
Because I work for Jean Regal.
Oh, that's right. And Jean knows all.
Jean will find you. I almost had to beg someone for, hey Mary, I almost had to beg someone for your cell phone number last week. Jean was hot on your trail.
Oh my goodness.
It was hilarious. I was like,
Okay.
I love it.
I couldn't find you.
Now what did I screw up this
You
time?
didn't. She wanted you to go out for dinner with
Oh.
someone.
Okay.
You got it?
We are in officially. So I'll turn over to you. Wow.
Okay.
When did that start being a thing?
Lucky day.
Oh, okay, never mind. I thought that was like in Chrome. I was like, what?
Okay, so this here.
Yeah.
How was Toronto?
It was fine.
Can you share your cell phone?
The law of USB. You're going to do it wrong the first time.
Um,
Everybody is
Well,
a victim
not
to
use it
that.
for nefarious reasons, but I'm not joking. If Jean Regal had her way, I'd have been on a plane last
I
week.
love it.
Like,
It's what I don't want to hear. Jean Regal is looking for you. Oh no.
well, because she knows that you believe in the things we believe in, and that's why.
She knows this. She's like, Amanda, please help me, and I will say probably yes.
Yes. She wants you to go out for dinner with the BMS.
Oh, the department head.
The department head candidate. Okay.
Wait, is this a thing?
393 8973.
That's the best.
Because that will be my face. Be like, who is this?
I know, right? Do not bother
The only
me.
like step left before you hit slideshow is, can we share our screen?
Oh, let me do that.
It goes to the. Okay.
Yeah, so it goes to our remote participants.
Yep.
As well as.
Who are already online and waiting for us. Oh, no, they're not. Elijah.
You were just kidding.
Hey, now you should be able to share.
Okay, yeah, just hit the escape key.
Then you just go into Zoom and then, yeah. And then hit share screen.
I promise I will never use your number for nefarious reasons. But you're gonna like your profile picture in my phone.